There's a sound the ocean makes just before a storm, a deep guttural rumble that warns you something powerful and indifferent is coming your way. It's a sound I've known my whole life. I heard a similar rumble, not from the sky, but through a telephone line, while lying in a hospital bed, with a mind as hazy as a foggy morning on this very beach. The first clear thought I had in what felt like an eternity was the sterile smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beep of a machine keeping time with my fragile heartbeat. The second was the voice of my lawyer, Mr. Davies, sharp and serious, cutting through the fog. "Eleanor," he said, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries, "we need to talk. It's serious." I blinked, trying to clear the cobwebs from my brain. The last thing I remembered was a blinding headache, a sudden searing pain behind my eyes while I was gardening, and then nothing. Blackness. Now this, a starched white room, and a voice of impending doom. "What is it, Robert?" I managed, my own voice a dry rasp. He paused, and in that brief silence I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. He said, "Your son-in-law, Mark, sold your beach house. I'm glad to have you here. This story is the most difficult I've ever had to tell. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. And if you believe in fighting for what's yours, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. It tells me I'm not alone in this fight." The words didn't compute at first. They floated in the sterile air of the hospital room, nonsensical and absurd. Sold my house, Mark, my daughter Laura's husband, the man who called me Mum and always made sure my wine glass was full at Christmas. It was impossible, a mistake, a cruel joke played by my scrambled brain. "That can't be right, Robert," I whispered, gripping the phone tighter. "I've been here." "How could he?" "He used a power of attorney, Eleanor," Mr. Davis explained, his voice patient but firm, like a doctor delivering a terrible diagnosis. "He claims you signed it over to him a month before your incident. It gave him full authority over your assets. A month before." I racked my brain, sifting through the foggy memories. I remembered Mark coming over with a stack of papers. He'd been so helpful, so concerned. "Just some standard estate planning documents, Eleanor," he'd said with that easy, reassuring smile of his, "making sure everything's in order so you and Laura don't have to worry." I was still grieving my husband, Richard, who had passed away 2 years prior. The weight of managing everything on my own felt immense. Mark's offer to help felt like a lifeline. I trusted him. I trusted my daughter's judgment. I signed where he pointed, my eyes tired, my guard completely down. I'd been so focused on a different kind of preparedness, the kind that comes after a life well lived, that I never prepared for the enemy already inside my walls. "The document is dated and notarized," Mr. Davies continued, pulling me back to the horrifying present. "The sale closed 3 days ago. The buyers have already taken possession." The air left my lungs. Possession. Strangers were in my home, Richard's home, the home we built with our own hands, nail by nail, dream by dream, right after we got married. The wood for the porch was from a collapsed barn on my grandfather's farm. Richard, a brilliant architect with more passion than money back then, designed it so that the sunrise would spill into the kitchen every morning. He used to say it was his way of giving me a new sun every day. Every summer, that house was filled with the laughter of our daughter Laura. The smell of salt and sunscreen was baked into its very walls. The faint pencil marks on the pantry doorframe, tracking Laura's height from a giggling toddler to a lanky teenager, were a sacred text of our family's history, and now it was gone, sold, like a piece of furniture, a thing without a soul, all while I lay here unconscious, fighting for my life after a cerebral aneurysm tried to claim me. My daughter Laura finally rushed into the room, her face a mask of frantic worry. "Mum, oh thank God you're awake." She threw her arms around me, and for a moment I clung to her, the familiar scent of her perfume a small comfort in the swirling chaos. But then Mr. Davies's words echoed in my ears. I pulled back, my hands on her shoulders, and looked her straight in the eye. "Laura," I said, my voice shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in years, Did you know Mark sold the beach house?" Her face crumpled. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She looked down at her hands, then over at the window, anywhere but at me. That was all the answer I needed. "Mum, it's complicated," she began, her voice small. "Complicated," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "What is complicated about your husband stealing my life's memories while I was in a coma?" "He didn't steal it," she said, a defensive edge to her tone. We were in trouble, Mum. Mark's business. Things have been bad. He said it was the only way. He said you'd want to help us. He promised we'd buy it back as soon as we were on our feet." The naivety of it, the sheer willful ignorance, was a physical blow. "He promised." I laughed, a bitter, broken sound that scraped my throat raw. "And you believed him? The house my father and I built, the only place I have left of him." Tears streamed down her face now. "He said the power of attorney was your idea. He said you wanted him to manage things if anything ever happened to you." "I saw the paper, Mum. It had your signature." "Of course it did. The signature of a grieving, trusting woman who saw a son in a man who was only a vulture." The doctor came in then, talking about recovery and physical therapy, but his words were just white noise. My war wasn't going to be fought in a rehabilitation gym. It was going to be fought in courtrooms and law offices. When I was finally discharged a week later, frail and walking with a cane, my first stop wasn't home. It was Mr. Davis's office. His office was on the 20th floor of a glass tower in downtown Charlotte, a world away from the salty air and sandy floors of my home. The view was panoramic, but all I could see was the chasm that had opened up in my life. Mr. Davis, a man with kind eyes but a shark's mind, laid out the documents on his large mahogany desk. There it was, the forged power of attorney. My signature was there, a near-perfect imitation, but it wasn't mine. The notary stamp was from a name I didn't recognize. "He was clever, Eleanor," Mr. Davis said, adjusting his glasses. "He created a document that looks on the surface completely legitimate. He used it to list the property, accept an offer, and close the sale. The money, $450,000, was wired to an account under his sole control." He paused, and his next words cemented the path I knew I had to take. "What he did isn't just a civil matter of getting your property back. The deliberate forgery of a document for financial gain, especially by exploiting a position of trust while you were medically incapacitated, the district attorney would call that felony fraud. We're talking about serious prison time." The words hung in the air. Prison, for my son-in-law, for my daughter's husband. A part of me, the mother in me, recoiled, but then I pictured him, his charming smile, his false concern. As he handed me those papers, I pictured strangers walking through my kitchen, sleeping in my bed. I pictured Richard's disappointed face. My grief and shock began to cool, hardening into something else. Determination. "Good," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Then that's what we'll do. We fight. We get it back, and he will answer for what he did." Mr. Davies nodded slowly, a small, approving smile on his lips. "I was hoping you'd say that. First step, we file a lis pendens against the property. It's a notice to the public that the title is in dispute. It will prevent the new owners from selling it or refinancing it. Then we file a lawsuit to have the sale voided, based on fraud, and I'll make a call to a friend in the DA's office. But Eleanor," he warned, "this will get ugly. Family matters always do." I thought of Laura, of her tear-streaked, confused face. I thought of the future grandchildren I had hoped to teach how to build sandcastles on that beach. "It's already ugly, Robert," I replied. "The only thing left to do is clean it up." That night, I tried to sleep in the guest room of Laura and Mark's sterile suburban house. They insisted I stay with them, a move I now realized was more about surveillance than care. I could hear them arguing in hushed, frantic tones from their bedroom down the hall. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the cadence of Mark's smooth, placating reassurances and Laura's high-pitched, anxious replies. They were a symphony of my betrayal. Around 2 a.m., unable to bear the silence of the house, I got up. My legs were still unsteady, but I made my way to Mark's home office. The door was unlocked. I don't know what I was looking for. A confession? A shred of remorse. The room was immaculate, organized to a fault. But on his desk, next to his sleek laptop, was a small, crumpled piece of paper that had missed the wastebasket. It was a receipt from a high-end car dealership, dated the day after the house sale closed. He hadn't just paid off his debts, He had treated himself to a brand new luxury SUV. I stared at the receipt, the black ink a testament to his greed. He hadn't just stolen my past, he had stolen it to finance his shiny, empty future. I folded the receipt and put it in the pocket of my robe. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was evidence. It was my resolve. The fight had just begun. The days that followed were a blur of legal jargon, depositions, and the slow, grinding work of building a case. Mr. Davies was my general, but I was the foot soldier on the front lines of a war no one else seemed to see. The lis pendens was filed, casting a legal shadow over my beach house, but it didn't remove the strangers living inside it. Every morning, I woke up in that soulless guest room with the immediate, gut-wrenching realization that I was homeless in my own life. The confrontation I was dreading and yet craving came on a Tuesday. I had just returned from a draining physical therapy session. Mark was in the kitchen humming to himself as he polished the chrome on his new espresso machine. The sheer audacity of his normalcy made my blood boil. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cutting through his cheerful humming. He turned, his face arranged into that familiar mask of warm concern. "Eleanor, you're back. How was therapy? You look tired. You should rest." "I'll rest when I'm back in my own home, Mark," I said, my hand gripping the head of my cane. "I know about the car. I know where the money went." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. It was like watching a curtain drop. The charming son-in-law vanished, and in his place was a stranger. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly. "The business is finally turning around. I'm allowed to have some success, aren't I?" "Success? Or the proceeds of a crime?" I shot back. "Mr. Davies has filed the lawsuit, Mark. He's also spoken to the district attorney's office. This isn't going away." He finally dropped the act. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. The mask was off. "You're making a huge mistake, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to tear this family apart over some old beach house you barely used. Laura is a wreck because of you. Is that what you want?" "What I want," I said, stepping closer, my voice trembling but firm, "is what is mine, what my husband and I built. You took that. You took it and you sold it for a car and God knows what else. You didn't just betray me, Mark. You desecrated a memory." "Oh, spare me the sentimental nonsense," he sneered. "It's a pile of wooden shingles on a floodplain. I did what I had to do for my family, for Laura, something you were clearly unwilling to do." That's when Laura walked in. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, darting between her husband and me. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Your mother is threatening to send me to prison," Mark said, turning to her, his face a perfect picture of a wounded victim. "She's twisting everything. I was trying to save us, honey. I told you, the house was just sitting there." I looked at my daughter, my heart aching. I prayed she would see through the performance. I prayed she would see the man I now saw so clearly. "Laura," I pleaded, "look at me. He forged my signature. He stole from me while I was unconscious. How can you stand by him?" Laura wrung her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Mum, please," she begged, "don't do this. He made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but he's my husband. Can't we just figure out the money, pay you back over time? Why do you have to be so vindictive?" Vindictive. The word hit me harder than any of Mark's insults. She saw me as the aggressor. She saw my fight for justice as a personal attack on her life, her marriage. In her eyes, I was the one destroying the family, not the criminal she was married to. Mark had not only stolen my house, he had stolen my daughter's loyalty, poisoning her against me with his lies. I knew then that I couldn't stay there another minute. I was an intruder in their life, a problem to be managed. That night, I packed my small suitcase, my hands shaking. I left a simple note on the perfectly made guest bed. "I'll be in touch through my lawyer." I called a cab and had it take me to a modest extended stay hotel, a place of beige walls and transient loneliness. It was a step down from their luxurious home, but it was a step up in dignity. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe air that wasn't thick with deceit. The investigation became my full-time job. Mr. Davies was handling the legal machinery, but I was searching for the human element, the crack in Mark's story. My first stop was the Outer Banks. I needed to see my house, even if I couldn't go inside. I rented a car and made the 4-hour drive, my heart heavy with every mile that brought me closer to my stolen life. When I arrived, the sight was a punch to the gut. There was a strange car in the driveway. A child's bicycle lay on its side on the lawn where Richard and I used to have our morning coffee. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and just watched. A young couple came out, laughing. They looked happy. They had no idea they were living in a crime scene, their happiness funded by my tragedy. I felt a surge of anger, not at them but at Mark, for putting them in this position, for turning my sanctuary into a source of pain for everyone it touched. I drove into the small town and started asking questions. I went to the little cafe where I knew all the waitresses. I spoke to Bob, the owner of the hardware store where Richard had bought every last screw for the house. I showed them a copy of the fraudulent power of attorney. "Do any of you recognize this notary?" I asked, pointing to the name Gerald Finney. No one had ever heard of him. In a town where everyone knew everyone, a strange notary signing off on the sale of the old Miller house would have been cause for gossip. This was the first real thread I could pull. Back in Charlotte, I relayed this to Mr. Davies. His own investigator had been trying to track down this Gerald Finney. The address listed for him was a P.O. box, and the phone number was disconnected. He was a ghost. "He's the key, Eleanor," Mr. Davies said over the phone. "If we can prove this notary is either fake or was complicit, Mark's entire story collapses. The signature becomes irrelevant if the notarization itself is fraudulent." My days took on a new rhythm: physical therapy in the morning, research in the afternoon. I spent hours in the library, learning everything I could about notary fraud. I became an amateur sleuth, driven by a cold, quiet rage. Laura would call sometimes, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Mum, please, just meet with us. Mark wants to apologize. He can explain. An explanation is something you give when you're late for dinner, Laura," I told her during one such call, my patience worn thin. "What your husband needs is a defense attorney. There's a difference." The calls became less frequent after that. The chasm between us was widening into a canyon. "Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through a betrayal by someone you trusted completely? Comment below. Your stories, your strength, it matters. And please, if you're finding value in my struggle, leave a like on the video. It truly helps remind me that I'm not fighting this alone. The loneliness of my fight was the hardest part. My days were spent in the sterile quiet of the hotel room, surrounded by legal documents that felt both monumental and meaningless. My evenings were filled with the phantom sounds of my real home, the creak of the porch swing, the whistle of the kettle, the sound of Richard's laughter. Some nights the grief was so overwhelming, I'd just sit in the dark and cry, mourning not just my husband, but the family I thought I had. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. While going through old photo albums, looking for a picture of the house in its early days for Mr. Davies, a photograph fluttered out from between the pages. It was from Laura and Mark's wedding reception 5 years ago. There I was, beaming with pride, and there was Mark, raising a glass for a toast. Standing just behind him, partially obscured but smiling, was a man I vaguely recognized. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. I knew that face. He was one of Mark's friends from college, one of the groomsmen, a man named Jerry. Gerald, could it be? My heart started pounding. I scanned the other wedding photos with a new, frantic energy. There he was again, laughing with Mark at the bar, and again in a group photo. I immediately called Mr. Davies. "I think I found our notary," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "His name is Gerald Finney, but his friends call him Jerry. He was a groomsman at my daughter's wedding." A stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," Mr. Davies said slowly. "Are you certain?" "I'm looking right at him," I replied. "Send me the file your investigator has. I want to see if the photo matches." He emailed it over immediately. The investigator had managed to pull a grainy driver's license photo for Gerald Finney based on the P.O. box application. It was him, older, with less hair, but unmistakably the same man. Mark hadn't hired a random phantom notary. He had enlisted his old college buddy to commit a felony. The sheer arrogant stupidity of it was breathtaking. He was so confident I would either die or be too broken to fight back that he didn't even bother to cover his tracks properly. "This changes everything," Mr. Davis said, his voice charged with new energy. "This isn't just fraud anymore. This is conspiracy. We have him, Eleanor. We have him cold." The next step was to find Jerry Finney. His trail was cold, but now we had a name and a face connected to Mark. Mr. Davis's investigator worked his magic, digging through old college records, social media breadcrumbs, and public records. It turned out Jerry had a string of failed businesses and a recent bankruptcy. He was exactly the kind of person who would be desperate enough to commit fraud for a payout. A week later they found him. He was working as a bartender at a dive bar 2 hours outside of Raleigh. Mr. Davis advised against me going, but I insisted. I needed to see the face of the man who helped dismantle my life. We drove out on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The bar smelled of stale beer and desperation. And there he was, wiping down the counter, looking tired and defeated. He was a shadow of the smiling man in the wedding photos. Mr. Davis approached him first, calm and professional. "Mr. Finney, my name is Robert Davis. I'm an attorney. We need to talk to you about a document you notarized for Mark Peterson." Jerry's face went white. He dropped the rag he was holding. He looked past Mr. Davis and saw me standing by the door. Recognition and then pure panic flashed in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, backing away. "I think you do," I said, stepping forward. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the empty bar. "You stood at my daughter's wedding. You ate my food and drank my champagne, and then you put your name on a lie that allowed your friend to steal my home." He started sweating, looking for an escape route. Mr. Davis laid it out for him, his voice clinical and cold. "We know you weren't a commissioned notary at the time of the signature. We know you backdated the document. We know Mark paid you $10,000 for your trouble. We can prove it. Right now you're an accomplice to felony fraud and conspiracy. You're looking at several years in prison. However, the district attorney's office is often amenable to cooperation. You have one chance right now to tell the truth and become a witness. The alternative is taking the fall with your friend." Jerry crumbled. He slumped onto a bar stool, his head in his hands. The whole sordid story came pouring out. Mark had come to him, desperate. He'd spun a story about how his mother-in-law was losing her mind, how she'd wanted him to take over, but they never got the paperwork right. He promised Jerry $10,000 to just sign and stamp a document. He even provided the notary stamp, bought illegally online. Jerry, buried in debt, agreed. He said he never thought it would come to this. He thought I was sick. He thought no one would ever look closely. He agreed to sign a sworn affidavit and testify. It was the nail in Mark's coffin. I left the bar feeling no triumph, only a profound sadness. This was the world Mark had created, a world of broken people preying on each other. That evening my phone rang. It was Laura. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mum, is it true, what they're saying about Mark, about a notary?" The news had obviously reached her. Mark, in his panic, must have confessed. "Yes, Laura," I said softly. "It's all true." I heard a sob, a gut-wrenching sound of a world breaking apart. "He lied to me," she whispered. "He lied about everything. All this time I defended him. I pushed you away." "I know," I said, my own eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mum," she cried. "I was so blind. What do I do?" "You come home," I said, "not to her house or my hotel, but to the idea of us. You just start from here." 2 days later, she showed up at my hotel room. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She had left him. The intricate web of lies he had woven had finally unraveled, and the reality of who she had married was too ugly to bear. She fell into my arms, and we just held each other, 2 women adrift in the wreckage of a man's greed. Her betrayal had hurt me deeply, but seeing her pain, her shame, I knew that she was a victim too, a different kind, but a victim nonetheless. The path to forgiveness was long, but for the first time I could see it beginning. We were no longer on opposite sides of the war. With Jerry Finney's sworn confession, the legal gears which had been grinding so slowly suddenly engaged with ferocious speed. Mr. Davies filed a motion for summary judgment. It was a legal maneuver, arguing that the facts were so overwhelmingly in our favor that no trial was necessary. Mark's defense, built on a foundation of lies, collapsed overnight. His lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, advised him to face the inevitable. The court date was on a crisp autumn morning. I walked in with Laura by my side. Her hand was in mine, a small, warm anchor in the cold, formal courtroom. Mark was already there, sitting with his lawyer. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his armor of arrogance. He wouldn't look at us. He stared straight ahead, his face pale and drawn. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the evidence, the forged power of attorney, the bank records showing the wire transfer to Mark, the receipt for his luxury SUV, and the damning affidavit from Gerald Finney. It took her less than 20 minutes. In the matter of Peterson versus Peterson, she declared, her voice echoing in the silent room, the court finds overwhelming and indisputable evidence of fraud. She looked directly at Mark, her expression a mixture of contempt and pity. The sale of the property at 142 Ocean Drive is hereby declared null and void. The title is to be immediately restored to the plaintiff, Mrs. Eleanor Miller. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I squeezed Laura's hand, tears of vindication streaming down my face. It was over. I had won. The judge wasn't finished. She addressed Mark directly. Mr. Peterson, your actions are not just a civil offense. They represent a shocking abuse of trust and a callous disregard for the law and basic human decency. This court has already been in communication with the district attorney. I suggest you prepare for the criminal proceedings that will undoubtedly follow. We walked out of the courtroom and into the bright sunlight. I felt like I was surfacing after being underwater for months. 2 weeks later, as the judge had predicted, Mark was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. He was facing years in prison. His fall was as swift and total as his ambition had been vast. The final step was the most important. It was the day I got the keys back. The young couple who had bought the house had been awarded damages from Mark, though it was unlikely they'd ever see the full amount. They were gracious, just as much victims as I was. They had packed their things and moved out, leaving the house empty and silent. Laura drove me there. As we pulled into the driveway, my heart was hammering against my ribs. It looked the same, but I knew I had changed. I was no longer the trusting, naive woman who had left it. I was a fighter, a survivor. I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. The door swung open, and the familiar scent of salt, cedar, and old memories washed over me. I stepped inside. The house was empty, cleared of the stranger's furniture, but it wasn't hollow. It was filled with echoes of the past, with the spirit of the life Richard and I had built. I walked slowly from room to room. I ran my hand along the cool stone of the fireplace we built together. I stood in the kitchen, and could almost see Richard smiling at me from across the island, the morning sun spilling in behind him. I walked to the pantry door, and there they were, the pencil marks tracking Laura's height, faint but still there, untouched. Laura came and stood beside me, her eyes wet with tears. "He didn't get this, Mum," she whispered. "He took the money, but he didn't get this." She was right. He had stolen the monetary value, but he could never touch the true worth of the house. That was something measured in love and memory, a currency he would never understand. We spent that first weekend cleaning, scrubbing away the last traces of the strangers and the ordeal. We opened all the windows to let the fresh ocean breeze chase away the ghosts of the last few months. We weren't just cleaning a house, we were reclaiming my life, and in doing so we were starting to rebuild our own relationship, one honest conversation at a time. My life is different now. The trust I once gave so freely is now earned. The world seems a little sharper, its dangers more real, but I am not broken. The fire I went through forged me into something stronger. I have my home back, my history secure. My relationship with my daughter, once shattered, is slowly mending, now built on a foundation of truth, however painful it was to unearth. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, I sit on the porch and watch the waves roll in. I think of Mark, and I don't feel anger anymore, just a sad, empty pity. He tried to take everything from me, believing I was weak, but he made a critical mistake. He messed with a woman's home, and a home like the woman who builds it has foundations far deeper and stronger than any con man could ever hope to shake. Thank you for watching until the very end of my story. Your presence here has been a comfort, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.